Good day, everyone. Welcome. Are you excited for a fun learning session? So, before we start, make sure you have the following: ballpen, paper or notebook, earphone, cell phone or laptop, your full attention, and being interactive. Have you heard about a quote, "You either control your mind or it controls you"? Or, "Strong minds suffer without complaining, but weak minds complain without suffering"? For today's lesson, we will be tackling about the Module 6 entitled The Power of Mind. I'm your presenter for today, Aubrey D. Nugid. Before we move on to our lesson, I have prepared a fun fact activity. How smart is your right foot? All together. First, while sitting, lift your right foot off the floor and make clockwise circles. Second, then draw an anti-clockwise circles in the air with your right hand. Your foot will change direction. If this is true, then we will be discovering it later. Did you know that your brain literally heats up when you're stressed? Smiling can cool it down. At the end of this self-learning module, you will be able to discuss that understanding the different parts of the brain, processes, and function may help in improving our thoughts, behavior, and feelings. Especially, learners should be able to first, identify the parts of the brain and its function. Second, describe the concept of the left and right brain functions that may help in improving one's learning. And lastly, make a plan to improve learning using the both left and right brain development.
The brain is the most complex organ in the human body. As part of the nervous system, the brain coordinates all of the body's functions. In adult humans, the brain is a 3-pound gelatinous mass of fat and protein. It's comprised of 4 main regions: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon, and each one controls specific tasks.
The brain has the major parts of forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain includes the cerebrum, the limbic system, whereas you can find the thalamus and hypothalamus, and the cerebral cortex. The midbrain, which we found in the middle, and the hindbrain, that is below to the midbrain, includes pons, medulla oblongata, cerebellum. The first part is the forebrain. It is the biggest part of the brain, mostly contains of cerebrum. Cerebrum controls speech, reasoning, learning, emotional control, and memory, and it has 2 parts.
The largest section is the cerebrum, and it makes up over 3/4 of the brain's volume. It consists of neurons and nerve fibers that transmit information from the neurons throughout the brain and body. The cerebrum controls higher functions such as learning, reasoning, and speech, plus senses like sight and hearing.
The first part of the forebrain is the limbic system, which includes hippocampus, amygdala, thalamus, and hypothalamus. First is the hippocampus. It is a small curved formation in the brain that plays an important role in the limbic system. The hippocampus is involved in the formation of new memories and is also associated with learning and emotions. Hippocampus focuses on learning and memory. The second one is the amygdala. Each amygdala is located close to the hippocampus in the frontal portion of the temporal lobe. Your amygdalae are essential to your ability to feel certain emotions and to perceive them in other people. This includes fear and the many changes that it causes in the body, which is the center of emotions like aggression and anger. The amygdala is specialized for input and processing of emotion, while the hippocampus is essential for declarative or episodic memory. During emotional reactions, these two brain regions interact to translate the emotion into particular outcomes. The third one is the thalamus, also found in the forebrain. Its main job is to control the flow of information going to the cerebral cortex, which is distributed to the muscles and senses, and vice versa. In short, the thalamus receives a sensation, and this sensation is then passed onto the cerebral cortex for interpretation as touch, pain, or temperature. Lastly is the hypothalamus, which is responsible for basic processes like control of hunger, regulation of temperature, thirst, and circadian rhythms or body clock, which tells you when to eat or sleep and rise. It's respond to sunlight and temperature. Hypothalamus also plays a crucial role in releasing hormones and modulate endocrine system or managing of sexual behavior.
The fourth region is located above the brainstem and makes up the core of the brain, the diencephalon. About the size of an apricot, the diencephalon is a grouping of several structures. The thalamus, which processes and transmits information from all senses except smell, and the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which work together to produce and regulate neurochemicals. These structures help govern sensations, weight regulation, energy, and instinctual behaviors such as eating, drinking, and having sex.
Fun facts: when your hippocampus kicks in and you finally remember what you wanted to say. This is an example when your amygdala goes out of control. And also, say no to I love you from the bottom of my heart, and say yes to the I love you from the bottom of my hypothalamus. Shakespeare once said that love looks not with the eyes but with the mind. When you are in love, all kinds of emotions can flare out of nowhere. These are known as the brain's calming chemicals. Oddly enough, these also come from the hypothalamus, where lust originates. These chemicals accompany the feelings of closeness and coziness that come with a long-term relationship. Oxytocin is also called the cuddle hormone. As seen on the picture, thalamus is the same as hypothalamus. It is wrong because the hypothalamus regulates the body's vital metabolic processes affecting temperature, blood pressure, hunger, thirst, and sleep. It controls the endocrine system by affecting the pituitary gland's production of hormones. The thalamus takes information from a number of different areas of the brain and relays it to the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of gray matter where higher level of brain functions takes place. Ang ibig sabihin lang nito ay mostly yung hypothalamus is nagsisecrete ng hormone including vasopressin and oxytocin, while yung thalamus naman is connected to sa pagtake ng information from a number of different areas of the brain. Basta ang hypothalamus, ang hypo, ibig sabihin nito ay below. Ang hypothalamus is below at the thalamus. The second part of the forebrain is called the cerebral cortex. It is the outer thin layer of the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes. Each lobe governs specific functions. The first one is the frontal lobe. This lobe is found at the front of the brain. It is responsible for the higher level of thinking processes like problem solving, learning, and organizing. It is also regulates attention, memory, and mobility. As seen in the diagram, the frontal lobe has the color of light brown. The second lobe is called the parietal lobe. At the back of the frontal lobe is the parietal lobe. This region integrates sensory data like touch, pain, pressure, and temperature. It also helps in kinesthesia, or the perception that the limbs or the body is moving. As seen in the diagram, the parietal lobe has the color of red-orange. The third one is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is found near each ear. Its main function is to process auditory signals and information. It is an important component in understanding language. It is also involved in the long-term memory encoding. The presence of the tumor in this lobe can give rise to hallucinations. As seen in the diagram, the temporal lobe has the color of golden brown. Lastly, the occipital lobe. This region is found at the lower back part of the cortex. Its job is to process visual information, including the detection and identification of colors, movement, and other visual stimuli. It gets information from the eyes and uses them to form perceptions or interpretations. As seen in the diagram, occipital lobe has the color of green. Let's go on to the midbrain. This part is found between the forebrain and the hindbrain. It is responsible for the eye movement and auditory information. The midbrain serves as the link in the signal transmissions between the forebrain and the hindbrain. According to Dr. Makoto Shishida, who dedicated 40 years of studies into the brain functions, we can use the term midbrain as is the popular. There is a segment known as the interbrain that lies between the left and the right regions. It is essential to excite to improve the abilities of the human thoughts. The interbrain position on the center of the cerebrum combines the features of each part of midbrain. The interbrain acts to manage the focus and adjust with advanced intelligence. If a person's developed his midbrain, he is going to collect a memory to allow him to inspect something he can visible or hurt. And lastly, the hindbrain is one of the three major regions of our brains, located at the lower back part of the brain. There are three main parts of the hindbrain: pons, cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata. Cerebellum, also known as the little brain, with its numerous and deep folds which controls movement and balance, or as we call motor memory, because it automatically happens. Like when we are drinking, the cerebellum is affected. What I mean is drinking alcohol or taking drugs, just like this clip. Yeah, right. So we move on to the second one, the pons, which is responsible for processes like arousal and the sleep and waking up cycle. The pons sends signals to the thalamus and to the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for most thought processes. It is also sends signals to turn off motor neurons in the spinal cord, causing a temporary paralysis that prevents movement. The third one is the medulla oblongata. It's considered as the extension of the spinal cord that is found in the skull. It regulates important processes like circulation and other involuntary processes like heart rate, blood pressure, regulation, salivation, sneezing, breathing, vomiting, and coughing. If your medulla oblongata becomes damaged, it can lead respiratory failure, paralysis, or loss of sensation, and it can cause also several functions of the body to be thrown off and even death.
Under the cerebrum is the second largest part of the brain, the cerebellum. Much like the cerebellum has nerve cells and nerve fibers. It carries signals to other parts of the brain and the spinal cord. The cerebellum is responsible for coordinating muscle movements, particularly those that help maintain the body's balance and posture. The third region, the brainstem, lies in front of the cerebellum and anchors the brain to the spinal cord. The brainstem is a collection of structures that include the pons, a mass of nerve fibers that carry sensory information, the midbrain, a region of fibers and structures that help control movement, along with auditory and visual processing, and the medulla oblongata, which creates motor and sensory pathways between the midbrain, the pons, and the spinal cord. Altogether, the parts of the brainstem control vital bodily functions such as cardiac activity, respiration, digestion, and sleep. The brain's four main components, the diencephalon, brainstem, cerebellum, and cerebrum, work in sync to ensure bodily functions are fully operational. The brain has even evolved mechanisms to protect itself. One such mechanism is the blood-brain barrier, a semi-permeable cellular wall that only allows specific chemicals to enter from the body's bloodstream into the brain. Despite this protection, tumors and other complications can lead to life-threatening problems and diseases in the brain, such as dementia. Thankfully, scientists have found ways to improve brain health. Staying physically active and eating a balanced diet may preserve cognitive function and even reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's. So while the brain only makes up a small percentage of the body, it plays a crucial role in the body's functions and overall well-being.
So let's move on to the concept of left and right brain functions that may help in improving one's learning. Researchers believe that brain dominance determines a person's preferences, problem-solving style, personality characteristics, and even career choices. For example, a right-brain individual will quickly get a feeling for a situation, while a left-brained person will usually ask a lot of questions first. So, here is a video presentation so that we can deeply understand the lesson about it.
Behold the human brain, its lumpy landscape visibly split into a left and right side. This structure has inspired one of the most pervasive ideas about the brain, that the left side controls logic and the right creativity. And yet, this is a myth, unsupported by scientific evidence. So how did this misleading idea come about, and what does it get wrong? It's true that the brain has a right and a left side. This is most apparent with the outer layer, or the cortex. Internal regions, like the striatum, hypothalamus, thalamus, and brainstem, appear to be made from continuous tissue, but in fact, they're also organized with left and right sides. The left and the right sides of the brain do control different body functions, such as movement and sight. The brain's right side controls the motion of the left arm and leg, and vice versa. The visual system is even more complex. Each eye has a left and right visual field. Both left visual fields are sent to the right side of the brain, and both right fields are sent to the left side. So the brain uses both sides to make a complete image of the world. Scientists don't know for sure why we have that crossing over. One theory is it began soon after animals developed more complex nervous systems, because it gave the survival advantage of quicker reflexes. If an animal sees a predator coming from its left side, it's best off escaping to the right. So we can say that vision and movement control are two systems that rely on this left-right structure. But problems arise when we overextend that idea to logic and creativity. This misconception began in the mid-1800s when two neurologists, Broca and Wernicke, examined patients who had problems communicating due to injuries. The researchers found damage to the patient's left temporal lobes, so they suggested that language is controlled by the left side of the brain. That captured the popular imagination. Author Robert Louis Stevenson then introduced the idea of a logical left hemisphere competing with an emotional right hemisphere, represented by his characters Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But this idea didn't hold up when doctors and scientists examined patients who were missing a hemisphere or had their two hemispheres separated. These patients showed a complete range of behaviors, both logical and creative. Later research showed that one side of the brain is more active than the other for some functions. Language is more localized to the left and attention to the right. So one side of the brain may do more work, but this varies by system rather than by person. There isn't any evidence to suggest that individuals have dominant sides of the brain, or to support the idea of a left-right split between logic and creativity. Some people may be particularly logical or creative, but that has nothing to do with the sides of their brains. And even the idea of logic and creativity being at odds with each other doesn't hold up well. Solving complex math problems requires inspired creativity, and many vibrant works of art have intricate logical frameworks. Almost every feat of creativity and logic carries the mark of the whole brain functioning as one.
So based on the video that I have shown, the theory is that people are either left-brained or right-brained, meaning that one side of their brain is dominant. If you're mostly analytical and methodical in your thinking, you're said to be left-brained. If you tend to be more creative or artistic, you're thought to be a right-brained, but it was just a myth. At ito ay pawang hindi pa napapatunayan. Therefore, there is nothing good or bad about either preference. Both orientations can be equally successful in accomplishing a single task. However, one may be more appropriate over the other depending on the situation. As we can see on the presentation, the whole brain model was developed by Ned Herman. Herman created this metaphorical model to illustrate that each person's brain basically has 4 quadrants when it comes to process of thinking and learning. Each of these quadrants are characterized by different learning or thinking styles. The quadrant A is about analytical. It knows how things work, knows about money, likes number, is realistic, is critical, is logical, quantifies and analyzes. The quadrant B is about practical. It plans and timely, is neat, organized. It is reliable, gets things done, establish procedures, takes preventive action. The quadrant C is more about relational. It feels, talks a lot, it is emotional, it is expressive and supportive, touches a lot, likes to teach, and is sensitive to others. And lastly, the quadrant D. It is more about experimental. It infers, imagines. It is curious or plays, likes surprises, breaks rules, speculates, and impulsive, takes risk. So, what quadrant are you in? Did you learn a lot in this lesson? What I can say is that it's all in our mind. Mind is very powerful. It controls everything. The thoughts, actions, decision, emotion, powerful enough to constantly contribute to its outcome. And here, I will give you an advice. It is called about law of attraction. If you focus on success and you will be attract success, but when you focus on your failure, and you will be attracted to failure. If you stop doubting yourself and letting your mind get the best of you, then the hard work you put into everything will be reciprocates. And at the end, your mind becomes your door to success. Your mind becomes your path to prosperity, and you are in control. Thank you for listening and understanding this lesson.